Chapter 2, The Dream Mechanism. Dreams of Adults, and Freud's own dream analyzed. We know that the dreams of children seem to be the realization of a wish from the preceding day. What we don't know yet is if the theory holds for adults who seem to have rather strange dreams. How did Freud's dream, for example, relate to any type of desire? After analyzing his own dream, Freud identifies that his wife had been recently preoccupied with guests that he wanted to avoid. In his dream, however, the woman sitting next to Freud gives him her undivided attention. So the dream seems to be a realization of what Freud had wanted. As Freud continued his analysis, he found that the principal unifying theme of the underlying thoughts was that he would like love that cost him nothing. The dream character of Miss E.L. says to Freud, "You've always had such beautiful eyes." This expression, as we said before, implies that people do things simply out of love. The more Freud connects the dots, the more it seems as though the strange dream did mean to placate some sort of underlying desire. It's clear that some portion of the latent content is a wish, and that wish was fulfilled in the scene of the dream. Freud says the complex nature of the dream is due in part to some sort of condensation. Freud's dream had a mix of elements. It had the daughter of a man Freud used to owe money. There was a woman paying undivided attention to Freud. The dream takes place in a restaurant where, as Freud notes, cost has an equivalent meaning to taste in German. So we see these themes of debt and cost and want. It's clear, Freud says, that the dream work performs some kind of coming together or condensation of the underlying dream thoughts. Freud calls this first mechanism where the dream thoughts come together in a combined way to form a complex scene where they're all represented, condensation. That's the first mechanism, and perhaps even the most important mechanism of dream formation. Freud gives an example of another dream of his, where he's at a pool and he sees some swimmers swimming apart from each other and then a person being carried out. He notes that this dream seems to be a combination of several famous paintings that take place around water, such as the flood and the surprise in the bath. And it even seems to bring to mind to Freud a memory from his childhood when he saw a person almost drown in a pool. Freud further analyzes his dream and notices how more just subtle details seem to bring to mind past experiences throughout his life, all of which have to do with love and desire. Freud compares this process of condensation to the work of Galton, who was a famous physician. He had placed family portraits over each other and saw that among a family there was a unifying kind of theme or general family resemblance that you could form. The dream has this sort of resemblance among all the impressions, desires, and thoughts that it combines. In this way, we could say that dream thoughts overdetermine the scene that takes place within the dream. So that is, when the process occurs that latent thoughts are converted to dream scenes, it's not exactly a one-to-one correspondence, like you had a certain impression or memory of a given person, and then that person is accurately represented in the dream. It's that the sum total of underlying thoughts are used as a whole when combined to make the dream image. So within the dream, any given element within the dream is somehow a product of the sum total of underlying dream thoughts. Much like when one creates a slant rhyme, the dream work can combine elements of several latent thoughts that have nothing in common so that they can both be represented in the dream image. The dream achieves this through double representation. That is, it finds an alternative way to represent a given underlying thought. Freud identifies this in his own dream, where the principal thought of the latent content was that he would like to have something for nothing, essentially. He would like to receive love without having to do anything in return to earn that love or to preserve it. In the dream, this is replaced with the thought, I would like something free of cost. Cost, again, is represented within the scene itself in the dream, being in a restaurant. A more specific example is how individuals are represented in dreams. Much like the dream itself, characters within a dream may be combinations of several impressions or individuals. It is through condensation that elements within a dream, like people, can take on new qualities as their representation is overdetermined by the underlying latent thoughts. Freud compares a dream person to something like a Chinese dragon, which is a combination of kind of like a snake and a cat and a dog and a lizard. The dream simply says all these things are people, have a certain quality in common. It's through the decomposition of these mixed images that we can find the interpretation of the dream. And the way to do that, according to Freud, is only through the psychoanalytic method. Freud gives another example of a dream scene that seems to combine, in a very, you could say, poetic way, several underlying thoughts. In Freud's dream, he's traveling in a carriage and carrying a glass hat. When Freud analyzes the dream, two associations come to mind. One, the expression, "He who keeps his hat in hand will travel safely throughout the land." And two, that the glass hat reminded Freud of Auer's light, which was an advancement in lighting technology in Freud's time. Thought then occurs to Freud that he too was about to invent something through a scientific method, that is psychoanalysis, which would allow him to travel outside his home city of Vienna. So the dream, in a way, seemed to represent Freud's wish that psychoanalysis would make him successful enough to be able to travel. And all that was represented just in this simple scene of Freud carrying a glass hat. As we said before, dream condensation can be formulated as the overdetermination of the manifest content, or the dream itself, by the matter of the dream thoughts as a whole. Said another way, one dream element represents more than one dream thought. It is through condensation that the dream is then dramatized. That is, the underlying thoughts are combined through themes and then made into a vivid collection of images and scenes. Freud notices, however, that while the thoughts given by analysis are similar to the dream content itself, that doesn't explain why the manifest dream seems so different from the latent underlying thoughts that seem to provoke it. Freud writes, "Condensation and dramatization do not wholly account for the difference between dream contents and dream thoughts. There is evidence of another factor, which deserves careful consideration." Freud notices that, in terms of importance, the dream thoughts and the dream content seem to be inversely related. The content that is most prominent in the dream seems the least important when the underlying thoughts are identified. Conversely, the dream thoughts that seem most important emotionally may be absent from direct representation in the dream, or may only be represented in the dream by a sort of illusion. It's this process in the formation of dreams that makes the dream's underlying meaning less obvious. Freud calls this process dream displacement. Freud writes, "During this process, which I will call the dream displacement, I notice also the psychical intensity, significance, or emotional nature of the thoughts become transposed in sensory vividness. What was clearest in the dream seems to me, without further consideration, the most important." Freud notes that many dreams have minimal displacement. It can take place to varying degrees. In Freud's dream at the restaurant, the most prominent feature was Miss L making an advance towards Freud, while the most important underlying thought or theme was Freud's desire for love that will cost nothing, which lies behind the woman's subtle statement, or even the scene of the restaurant itself. When displacement is overcome through the psychoanalytical method, it becomes clear what provokes a dream and what its relation to waking life is. Displacement is also part of the reason that dreams are often not taken seriously, because it flips in terms of importance what is represented in the dream, which is why trivial details from the previous day can seem more prominent on the surface when we look at a dream. and it's only through analysis that we can find how these trivial details correspond to more important underlying thoughts. The final mechanism in the formation of a dream that Freud lists is intelligibility, which is the final elaboration of the dream. It's sort of a preliminary interpretation. Freud writes, intelligibility behaves towards the actual dream content just as our normal psychical action behaves towards some proffered perception that is to our liking. The dream content is thus secured under the pretense of certain expectation. Everyone is aware that we are unable to look at any series of unfamiliar signs or to listen to a discussion of unknown words without at once making perceptual changes through our regard for intelligibility. So in this way, we're connecting things that are unknown to what is familiar. As we're having the initial dream experience, we're projecting, as it were, a sort of meaning onto it, or where there's an impression of what the dream stands for, what the underlying themes are. But this preliminary experience that we have, the dream as we understand it while we're having the dream, is not necessarily the real meaning of the dream. Freud says the process of intelligibility influences dream content that has already been built up. So the dream is formed, and then intelligibility kind of places a meaning, like a superficial meaning, on top of the dream while it's being presented. It's not necessarily influencing the underlying structure of the dream itself. The key takeaway of intelligibility is how it reflects the dream's effort to impose a false sense of order on the dream content. While intelligibility makes the dream appear more understandable, it often conceals the deeper latent thoughts, which can only be uncovered through psychoanalysis. And then to summarize, dream work consists solely in following factors: condensation, where thoughts are come together as a whole and are used as the basis by which the dream is formed; displacement, where there is a inverse relationship between the dream thoughts and the dream content, the manifest content of the dream. Depending on the degree to which displacement occurs, what is most important in the underlying dream thoughts that provoke the dream and that are used to make up the dream may be less obvious within the dream itself, or may not be directly represented at all. Dramatization, where the dream is converted into scenes and images, and super elaboration, which is intelligibility. Freud notes that everything else in the manifest dream can be found within the latent dream thoughts. That is, after these mechanisms take place, all of their content is composed merely of what was already given in the underlying thoughts. That is, dream work is not creative, it is transformative.